"A fitting omen, dear. You don't belong here," Victoria Newman sneered, her voice dripping with venom as she stood over the shredded remains of Catherine Okoye's bespoke ivory lace wedding gown, torn apart in the dead of night on Isla Serenita. The Caribbean island, aglow with orchids and lanterns, was meant to cradle Catherine and Edward Newman's dream wedding. Still, Victoria, Edward's mother, had other plans, dragging his ex-girlfriend Claire to sabotage the Black Bride. From Brooklyn, will Catherine crumble under their racist scorn, or will she turn their malice into her triumph? Stick around for a tale of defiance that'll leave you speechless. We'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. Drop it in the comments. Hit the subscribe button and bell icon to stay up to date with our latest stories, and share this video. Can Catherine outsmart her foes? Stay tuned to find out. The sun hung low over Isla Serenita, a private Caribbean jewel where turquoise waves kissed powdery white sand. The island, a tapestry of swaying palms and cascading orchids, thrummed with the promise of a wedding that would etch itself into memory. Catherine Okoye, a black woman whose mahogany skin glowed like polished amber, stood barefoot on the shore, her laughter a melody against the sea's gentle roar. Her eyes, sharp with intelligence and soft with love, locked onto Edward Newman, her fiancé, whose hazel gaze held her like a vow. His hand, warm and steady, squeezed hers as they surveyed the island's transformation. Ivory tents billowed in the breeze, lanterns flickered like fireflies, and floral arches framed a path to forever. This was their moment, a sanctuary of joy. But beneath the paradise, a storm brewed, its first gusts already whispering malice. Catherine, a real estate titan who'd risen from Brooklyn's modest streets to own this very island, had poured her soul into this day. Her empire, built on grit and vision, was a testament to her defiance of a world that often tried to dim her light. Edward, heir to a Chicago finance dynasty, loved her with a fierceness that silenced doubters, or so they thought. His mother, Victoria Newman, a woman whose elegance masked a heart of ice, saw Catherine as a threat, a gold digger who'd ensnared her son to siphon his wealth. Victoria's disdain had simmered for months, but today, as the rehearsal dinner loomed, she arrived with a weapon sharper than words. Claire Winston, Edward's ex-girlfriend, a white socialite whose beauty was a polished blade. The pavilion, an open-air marvel draped in gossamer silk, glowed under the gathering stars. Guests, a mix of Chicago elites and Catherine's loyal allies, mingled over flutes of champagne, their chatter a soft hum. Catherine, in a flowing coral dress that hugged her curves, moved with grace, her smile a shield against the undercurrent of tension. Edward, dashing in a linen suit, stayed close, his arm a quiet anchor. But the air shifted as Victoria swept in, her emerald gown trailing like a royal decree. Her pale skin, stark against the island's warmth, seemed to repel the light. Behind, her Claire glided, her blonde hair catching the candlelight, her smile as false as a mirage. Evelyn, Edward's sister, and their uncle Richard flanked them, their eyes glinting with shared intent. Victoria raised a crystal flute, her voice slicing through the pavilion like a shard of glass. "To Edward," she declared, her lips curling, into a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and his choice, though some might say it's a costly one. The words landed like a whip, their meaning unmistakable. Catherine, a black woman from Brooklyn, was here for money, not love. Guests froze, forks hovering, eyes darting to Catherine. A few coughed, feigning distraction, but the silence screamed. Catherine's pulse quickened, but her face remained serene, a mask honed by years of navigating rooms where she was underestimated. Edward's jaw tightened, his hand tightening around hers, but she squeezed back, a silent signal. Not yet. Claire seized the moment, gliding toward Catherine with the grace of a predator. "You must be thrilled, Catherine," she purred, her voice syrupy, her blue eyes scanning Catherine's dress as if pricing it. Not every girl gets an island wedding. The condescension was a needle, sharp and precise, but Catherine met it with a nod, her smile unwavering. "I'm grateful," she said, her tone warm but edged with steel. Claire's lips twitched, her mask slipping for a heartbeat, revealing a flicker of malice. Catherine caught it, her mind already turning. Claire wasn't here to celebrate. She was a pawn in Victoria's game, but one with her agenda. Evelyn, emboldened by the champagne and her mother's lead, sidled up, her voice a sneer wrapped in velvet. "Brooklyn's quite a leap to this," she said, gesturing at the pavilion's opulence. "Must have cost Edward a fortune to make you fit in." Richard, nursing a whiskey, chuckled, his jowls quivering. "Indeed," he muttered, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "This island splendor isn't exactly your scene, is it?" The words were a gauntlet, thrown to diminish her, to remind her she was an outsider in their world. Catherine's. Chest tightened, not for herself but for the staff, black and brown islanders who moved silently among the guests, their dignity a quiet rebuke to the Newman's scorn. She thought of her journey, the Brooklyn girl who'd scrubbed floors to pay for college, who'd faced sneers from clients who assumed she was the help, who'd built an empire brick by brick. Isla Serenita was her crown, bought with her wealth, not Edward's. The Newmans didn't know, and their ignorance was her advantage. She tilted her head, her smile a blade of its own. "It's everyone's scene if they're invited," she said, her voice carrying just far enough to draw a few approving nods from guests. Edward's lips curved, pride flashing in his eyes, but the tension coiled tighter. Victoria, sensing the shift, glided closer, her silk scarf fluttering like a flag of false civility. "Oh, Catherine, Edward," she said, her tone dripping. With insincerity, what a coincidence running into Claire here. We thought she'd add a touch of familiarity to the occasion. Claire laughed, a tinkling sound that grated like broken glass. "I couldn't miss Edward's big day," she said, her eyes locking onto Catherine's, a challenge veiled in sweetness. Edward's grip on Catherine's hand tightened, his voice low. "Mother, that's enough." But Victoria's smile only widened, a predator scenting blood. The dinner unfolded, plates of grilled lobster and mango salsa passing under the stars, but the Newman's barbs continued. Evelyn whispered loudly to a guest about Catherine's questionable motives. Richard mused about the extravagance of the wedding, implying Edward's bank account was bleeding. Claire, ever the chameleon, hovered near Catherine, offering compliments that felt like traps. "Your dress is bold," she said, her tone suggesting it was too much, too bright, too Catherine. Each jab was a test, probing for weakness, but Catherine deflected with grace, her laughter a shield, her eyes missing nothing. As the night deepened, the pavilion's glow cast long shadows across the sand. Catherine stood with Edward by the shore, the waves a soft counterpoint to the storm in her heart. "They're relentless," Edward murmured, his voice thick with frustration. "I'm sorry, Catherine." She turned to him, her gaze fierce, but tender. "Don't be," she said. "They think they're in control, but this is my island and they're about to learn what that means." Her fingers brushed the necklace at her throat, a gift from her late mother, a reminder of the strength that had carried her this far. The stars above Isla Serenita burned bright, but the air held a charge, like the calm before a hurricane. Victoria's plot, Claire's deceit, and the Newman's prejudice were gathering force, ready to strike. Catherine felt it, a prickle at the base of her neck, but she was no stranger to battles. She'd faced worse than sneers and built a legacy from nothing. Tonight they thought they held the upper hand, but Catherine Okoye was playing a deeper game, one where the island itself was her ally, and the truth was her weapon. The rehearsal dinner ended, but the real drama was just beginning. The moon hung low over Isla Serenita, its silver light spilling across the Caribbean waves that lapped at the island's shores. The night was alive with the hum of cicadas and the distant murmur of guests retiring from the rehearsal dinner, their laughter fading into the velvet dark. Catherine Okoye, her coral dress now traded for a silk robe, stood in her bridal suite, a haven of white linens and jasmine-scented air. The room, perched above the beach, held her dreams. A bespoke ivory lace gown draped over a mannequin, its delicate fabric a promise of tomorrow's vows. Beside it, a photo of her and Edward Newman, his hazel eyes crinkling with love, anchored her heart. But as the clock neared midnight, a scream shattered the stillness, tearing through the suite like a blade. Catherine bolted upright, her pulse racing. The scream came again, raw and panicked, from her maid of honor, Lena, who burst through the door, her face ashen. "Catherine, the dress, it's ruined!" Lena's voice trembled, her hands wringing. Catherine's bare feet hit the cool hardwood, her robe trailing as she followed Lena to the suite's center. There, her gown lay in tatters, its lace shredded as if clawed by a beast. Petals of fabric littered the floor, the once pristine train now a mockery of her vision. Catherine's breath caught, her chest tightening, not with despair, but with a fury that burned cold and sharp. This was no accident. Before she could speak, a clamor rose from the beach below. Lena grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the window. "It's not just the dress," she whispered. They raced down the sandy path to the catering tent, where a crowd of staff huddled, their faces lit by flickering lanterns. The 5-tiered coconut lime cake, a masterpiece of spun sugar and tropical zest, was a wreckage, smeared across the sand like a child's tantrum. Frosting dripped from broken tiers, and the delicate orchid topper lay crushed. Catherine's hands clenched, her mind racing. This was sabotage, deliberate and cruel, aimed at breaking her spirit before her wedding. Victoria Newman's voice cut through the murmurs like a shard of ice. She emerged from the shadows, her silk shawl slipping from her shoulders, her pale eyes glinting with something too close to satisfaction. "A bad omen, dear," she said, her lips curling into a smirk. "Perhaps this wedding isn't meant to be. You don't belong here." The words were a dagger, each syllable laced with the venom of her belief that Catherine, a black woman from Brooklyn, had no place in her son's world. Guests whispered, their eyes darting between Victoria and Catherine, the air thick with tension. Edward, summoned by the commotion, stormed into the tent, his face dark with fury. "Enough, mother!" he roared, stepping between them. "Catherine's my wife and you're out of line. Stop this now." Victoria's smirk didn't waver, her gaze flicking to the ruined cake as if it proved her point. Behind her, Claire Winston hovered, her blonde hair catching the moonlight, her expression a mask of concern too perfect to be genuine. "Oh, Catherine, how awful," Claire cooed, her hands clasped as if in prayer. Who could do such a thing? Her voice was syrupy, but Catherine caught the faintest tremor, a crack in her facade. Claire offered to help search for clues, her eyes darting to the staff as if to shift blame. Catherine's instincts flared. She'd noticed a hint of jasmine perfume near the dress, the same scent Claire wore at dinner. The pieces were falling into place, but she needed proof. Catherine nodded, her voice calm despite the fire in her veins. "Thank you, Claire. Let's look around." She played along, her eyes scanning the tent, noting Claire's too quick glances at the staff, her fingers twitching as if nervous. The staff, mostly black and brown islanders, moved with quiet efficiency, their faces tight with anger at the disrespect. Catherine's heart ached for them, but her mind was a steel trap, calculating. She wouldn't confront Claire yet, let her think she'd won this round. Instead, Catherine slipped away, her bare feet silent on the sand, and found a quiet corner, near the pavilion. Her phone glowed as she dialed her contacts, her voice low but commanding. As a real estate mogul, Catherine had built a network across the Caribbean, allies who owed her favors. She called Sophia, a designer in San Juan whose gowns graced runways. "Sophia, it's Catherine. My dress is gone. I need a miracle by dawn." Sophia's voice crackled with determination. "I've got a silk masterpiece, perfect for you. It's on a chopper now." Next, Catherine reached Marcus, a Miami baker renowned for his artistry. "Marcus, my cake's destroyed. Can you deliver?" He laughed, a warm sound. 5 tiers coconut lime on a speedboat by sunrise. "You got this, Cat." Catherine exhaled, her resolve hardening. They thought they could break her, but they didn't know her strength. Back at the tent, Victoria held court, her voice carrying to the gathered guests. "This is what happens when ambition overreaches," she said. Her eyes locked on Catherine, who'd returned unnoticed. Evelyn, Edward's sister, nodded, her lips pursed. "It's almost poetic," she muttered, loud enough for others to hear. Richard, sipping a rum, chuckled. "Costly mistakes, these." Their words were a chorus, each note meant to diminish her. Edward, his fists clenched, stepped toward his mother, but Catherine touched his arm, her gaze steady. "Let them talk," she whispered, her voice a low fire. "They're digging their own grave." Claire, sensing the moment, approached again, her concern a performance. "Catherine, maybe it was an accident," she said, her eyes wide with false innocence. "The staff might have been careless." The accusation hung heavy, and Catherine saw the staff stiffen, their dignity under attack. She thought of her days as a young broker, swallowing insults from clients who assumed she was beneath them. This wasn't just about her. It was about every person here who'd faced their scorn. She smiled a predator's smile and said, "We'll find out, Claire. Truth has a way of surfacing." Edward pulled her aside, his voice thick with guilt. "I should have stopped them sooner," he said, his eyes stormy. "They're my family, but they're wrong." Catherine cupped his face, her touch grounding. "This isn't your fault," she said. "They chose this fight and I'm ready." Her mind flashed to the jasmine scent, Claire's nervous glances, and Victoria's smirk. They thought they'd humiliated her, but they'd only sharpened her blade. She glanced at the staff, their quiet strength a mirror to her own. Lena, still shaken, stood by her side, whispering, "You're unstoppable, Cat." Catherine nodded, her heart a drumbeat of defiance. The night stretched on, the moon casting long shadows across Isla Serenita. The ruined dress and cake were cleared away, but the sabotage lingered like a bruise. Catherine stood on her suite's balcony, the sea's rhythm steadying her. Victoria, Claire, and the Newmans thought they'd struck a fatal blow. But they didn't know the woman they'd challenged. Catherine Okoye had built an empire from nothing, faced worse than their petty schemes, and emerged stronger. Tomorrow she'd walk down the aisle, not as their victim, but as their reckoning. The island, her domain, held her secrets, and the night was far from over. The Caribbean sun dipped toward the horizon, painting Isla Serenita's sky in streaks of coral and molten gold. The island, bruised by the night's sabotage, now pulsed, with a defiant energy, as if the very sand and palms conspired to restore Catherine Okoye's vision. Her bridal suite, once a scene of devastation, was now a sanctuary of purpose. The shredded ivory lace gown was gone, replaced by a silk masterpiece airlifted from San Juan, its fabric shimmering like moonlight on water. Catherine stood before a mirror, her mahogany skin radiant against the gown's elegance, her eyes a storm of resolve and love. The wedding, delayed to dusk by the chaos of the ruined dress and cake, was no longer just a ceremony. It was a declaration. Outside, the Yaoi island buzzed with renewed life. Staff scurried, their faces lit with pride, setting up floral arches and relighting lanterns that had dimmed in the night's turmoil. The new 5-tiered coconut lime cake, rushed from Miami, stood proud in the reception tent, its orchids glistening, as if untouched by the previous sabotage. Catherine's network had worked miracles, but it was her unyielding spirit that held the day together. She smoothed the gown, her fingers brushing the necklace from her late mother, a talisman of strength. Lena, her maid of honor, hovered nearby, her earlier panic replaced by awe. "You look like a queen, Cat," she whispered. Catherine's lips curved, a spark of defiance in her gaze. "I feel like one." Edward Newman waited at the altar, his linen suit crisp, his hazel eyes scanning the path where Catherine would soon appear. The guests, a tapestry of Chicago, elites and Catherine's allies, settled into rows of white chairs, their murmurs a mix of anticipation and curiosity. The sabotage had spread like wildfire among them, and whispers of Victoria Newman's cruel words, "A bad omen, she doesn't belong," hung heavy. Victoria herself sat in the front row, her emerald shawl a stark contrast to her pale, pinched face. Beside her, Claire Winston, her blonde hair pinned with calculated perfection, feigned a smile, while Evelyn and Richard shifted uncomfortably, their earlier bravado dulled by the island's resilience. The music swelled, a soft steel drum, melody that seemed to rise from the sea itself. Catherine stepped onto the petal-strewn aisle, her gown trailing like a comet's tail. Gasps rippled through the crowd, not just at her beauty but at the sheer force of her presence. She was no victim of the night's cruelty. She was a phoenix, reborn in silk and fire. Edward's breath caught, his love a beacon that drowned out the Newman's glares. Catherine's eyes locked onto his, each step a vow before words were spoken. The guests rose, some instinctively, their applause a quiet rebellion against the prejudice that had tried to tarnish this moment. The officiant, a local elder with a voice like warm molasses, began the ceremony, his words weaving love and unity into the twilight air. Catherine and Edward exchanged vows, their voices steady but thick with emotion. "I choose you, Catherine," Edward said, his gaze unwavering. "Not just today, but through every storm, every fight." Catherine's reply was a blade of truth. "And I choose you, Edward, with all I am and all I've built." The words were a defiance, a rebuke to those who thought her unworthy. Rings slid onto fingers, and as they kissed, the island seemed to exhale, the waves roaring approval. Guests cheered, their joy a tide that swept away the Newman's venom. The reception unfolded under a canopy of lanterns, the air fragrant with jasmine and grilled seafood. Catherine and Edward took the dance floor, their movements fluid, their laughter a melody that silenced the whispers. Guests joined them, the music pulsing with soca and reggae, the island's heartbeat. Catherine caught glimpses of the staff, black and brown islanders who'd worked tirelessly, smiling with pride, their dignity a mirror to her own. She thought of the night's sabotage, the jasmine scent near her dress, Claire's too perfect concern. The puzzle was incomplete, but tonight she'd let love lead. Victoria, seated at a corner table, seethed, her champagne untouched. Her plan to humiliate Catherine had crumbled, and the island's beauty only mocked her failure. Claire, ever the performer, chatted with guests, her laughter brittle. Evelyn and Richard muttered to each other, their faces sour. Victoria's frustration boiled over, her gaze landing on Captain Marcus Tate, the black boat captain who'd ferried them to the island. He stood near the bar, his uniform pristine, his posture calm but alert. "You!" Victoria snapped, her voice carrying over the music. "Fetch me a drink, now." Marcus turned, his dark eyes steady, and explained with quiet dignity, "I'm the captain, ma'am, not waitstaff." Victoria waved a hand, her tone sharp. "Do your job, whatever." "It is." The words landed like a slap, and guests nearby froze, their eyes darting to Catherine. She stood across the dance floor, mid-twirl with Edward, but caught Marcus's gaze. The hurt in his eyes was a mirror to her own, a wound she'd carried through years of slights. She offered a subtle nod, a silent promise. "I see you." Marcus nodded back, his jaw tight but his composure unbroken. Catherine's heart burned, not just for herself, but for every person the Newmans had diminished. She leaned into Edward, whispering, "They're unraveling." He kissed her forehead, his voice a low growl, "And you're unstoppable." The dance floor swelled, guests losing themselves in the rhythm, their joy a shield against the Newmans. Bitterness? Catherine moved through the crowd, her gown catching the lantern light, her smile a beacon. She paused to thank the staff, her words warm and deliberate, ensuring they felt seen. A young server, her eyes shining, whispered, "You're our hero, Ms. Okoye." Catherine squeezed her hand, her resolve deepening. This wedding wasn't just hers, it was theirs, a triumph over those who sought to diminish them. As the night deepened, the lanterns cast golden patterns across the sand. Victoria's table grew quieter, their isolation a stark contrast to the celebration. Claire's smile faltered, her glances at Catherine sharper, as if sensing the tide turning. Evelyn and Richard slumped, their champagne glasses empty. Catherine, twirling with Edward under the stars, felt the weight of the night's victory. The sabotage had failed to break her, and the island, her empire, had risen to meet her. She thought of her mother's necklace, its weight a reminder of the girl who'd dreamed beyond Brooklyn's limits. Tomorrow the Newmans would face new reckonings, but tonight Catherine Okoye was a queen, her vows sealed, her light unyielding. The dawn broke over Isla Serenita with a blaze of amber, the Caribbean sun gilding the island's palms and beaches in a promise of renewal. The air, still fragrant with last night's jasmine and revelry, carried a new edge, a reckoning waiting to unfold. Catherine Okoye and Edward Newman stood on the deck of their private yacht, the Starlight Serenade, its sleek lines cutting through the turquoise waves. Catherine's silk shawl fluttered in the breeze, her mahogany skin catching the light as she laughed, Edward's arm around her waist. The wedding, a triumph over sabotage and scorn, had sealed their love under a starlit sky, and now they sailed toward a honeymoon of bliss. But back on the island, the Newmans, Victoria, Claire, Evelyn, and Richard, faced a humbling of their own making, orchestrated by those they'd underestimated. The shore bustled with departing guests, their suitcases rolling across the sand, as boats bobbed at the dock. Captain Marcus Tate, the black boat captain whose dignity Victoria had trampled, oversaw the exodus with a calm authority. His uniform was crisp, his dark eyes sharp, missing nothing. The staff, many of whom had borne the Newmans' racist jibes, moved with quiet pride, their loyalty to Catherine a silent force. Marcus had heard the whispers of Victoria's omen taunt, Claire's veiled accusations against the staff, and Evelyn's sneers about Catherine's Brooklyn roots. He'd seen Catherine's nod of solidarity last night, a spark that kindled his resolve. Today, he'd ensure the Newmans left with a lesson they wouldn't forget. The boats ferrying. Guests were sleek, modern vessels, their engines purring as they carried Chicago elites and Catherine's allies to the mainland. Marcus, however, had reserved a special craft for the Newmans, a rickety canoe, its paint chipped, its seats worn. He assigned Jamal, a local driver and his longtime friend, to man it. Jamal, a wiry man with a quick smile, had overheard Victoria's orders to Marcus and Evelyn's mutterings about the staff's unsuitability. The slights had stung, and Jamal's patience, like Marcus's, had worn thin. Marcus gave him a subtle nod, a shared understanding passing between them. The Newmans would ride last, and the sea would be their judge. Victoria, Claire, Evelyn, and Richard gathered at the dock, their designer sunglasses and tailored outfits a stark contrast to the island's earthy warmth. Victoria's emerald scarf fluttered, her lips pursed as she surveyed the departing boats. "This is intolerable," she snapped, her voice carrying to nearby staff. "Why are we waiting?" Claire, her blonde hair pinned tightly, sighed theatrically. "Honestly, the service here is dreadful," she said, loud enough for Jamal to hear as he prepped the canoe. Evelyn adjusted her hat, muttering, "Edward should have chosen a proper venue, not this place." Richard, nursing a hangover, grunted, "Let's just get off this rock." Marcus approached, his tone professional but edged with steel. "Your transport's ready," he said, gesturing to the canoe. Victoria's eyes narrowed, her scarf slipping as she peered at the vessel. "That? You expect us to travel in that?" she demanded. Marcus's smile was serene. "It's the last available, ma'am, safe and sound." Jamal, tying a rope, suppressed a grin. The Newmans, grumbling, climbed aboard, their luggage piled precariously. Victoria sat ramrod straight, her purse clutched like a shield. Claire smoothed her skirt, her composure strained. Evelyn and Richard slumped, their complaints a low drone. Jamal pushed off, the canoe wobbling under the weight. The sea, calm at first, grew choppy as they moved beyond the harbor. Jamal's hands, steady on the oars, began to steer with deliberate carelessness. He'd heard Claire's accusation that the staff were careless with the cake, Evelyn's sneer about unsuitable workers. Each word was a spark, and the canoe was his canvas. A sharp turn sent the boat lurching, water sloshing over the sides. Victoria gasped, gripping the edge. "What are you doing?" she shrieked. Jamal, his face a mask of innocence, called, "Just navigating the waves, ma'am." Another turn, sharper this time, and the canoe tipped violently. With a chorus of screams, Victoria, Claire, Evelyn, and Richard tumbled into the sea, their designer clothes soaked, their dignity sinking with them. Victoria's scarf floated like a green flag of surrender, her hair plastered to her face. Claire flailed, her sunglasses lost to the waves. Evelyn sputtered, her hat bobbing away while Richard cursed, his whiskey flask slipping from his pocket. Nearby boats carrying departing guests erupted in laughter, phones flashing as they captured the spectacle. "Look at them," a guest hooted. "Thought they owned the place." Jamal, circling back, offered a hand, his tone mock solicitous. "Need a lift?" Victoria, coughing, glared but had no choice, climbing back into the canoe, her emerald gown dripping. The others followed, their faces burning with shame. The ride to the mainland was silent, the Newman's arrogance drowned in the salty waves. Back on Isla Serenita, Marcus watched from the dock, his expression neutral but his eyes twinkling. He caught the eye of a staff member who nodded, understanding the quiet justice served. On their yacht, Catherine and Edward sipped coffee, the island receding into an emerald speck. A staff member had whispered of the canoe mishap, and Catherine's lips curved, her gaze meeting Marcus's across the distance. She raised her mug, in a silent toast, gratitude and solidarity passing between them. Edward chuckled, his arm around her. "They had it coming," he said. Catherine leaned into him, her voice soft but fierce. "They thought they could break us. They forgot who I am." The sea sparkled, carrying the Newmans' humiliation to the mainland. Victoria's scarf, now a soggy ruin, was a symbol of their fall. Claire's polished facade had cracked, Evelyn's hat was lost, and Richard's bravado was drowned. The island, Catherine's empire, had spoken, and its voice was the laughter of those they'd scorned. The Newmans thought they'd leave triumphant, but Isla Serenita had other plans, and Catherine's light burned brighter for it. The midday sun blazed over Isla Serenita, its rays dancing on the Caribbean waves as the last boats departed, carrying whispers of the Newmans' watery humiliation. Catherine Okoye and Edward Newman, now far from the island aboard their yacht, Starlight Serenade, sailed through turquoise waters, their laughter a quiet hymn of triumph. The wedding, a defiant stand against sabotage and scorn, had bound them under a twilight sky. But the island's final act was still unfolding. Back on shore, the Newmans, Victoria, Claire, Evelyn, and Richard, trudged toward the mainland, their soaked designer clothes clinging like shame, their arrogance battered by the sea's rebuke. Yet the true reckoning awaited, not in the waves, but in the headlines that would shatter their illusions and lay bare Catherine's power. By noon, the internet hummed with the story of the wedding. News outlets, from tabloids to elite society pages, splashed vivid accounts across screens worldwide. "Caribbean wedding triumphs over sabotage," one headline blared, praising Catherine's grace under pressure. Another, sharper, cut deeper. "Brooklyn mogul owns Isla Serenita, not Newman heir." The revelation was a bombshell. Catherine Okoye, the black woman Victoria had branded a gold digger, was the island's sole owner, her real estate empire funding every orchid, lantern, and vow. The narrative Victoria had spun, that Catherine was leeching Edward's wealth, crumbled like sandcastles before the tide. Social media amplified the story, with grainy videos of the Newmans' canoe debacle going viral, captioned with gleeful mockery, entitled, "Elites Eat Humble Pie." Victoria, Claire, Evelyn, and Richard, now huddled in a mainland hotel, their luggage dripping, stared at their phones in stunned silence. Victoria's emerald scarf, a sodden ruin, lay discarded on the floor, a symbol of her unraveling control. Her pale fingers trembled as she scrolled through the articles, each word a dagger to her pride. "This can't be," she muttered, her voice cracking. Claire, her blonde hair still damp, clutched her device, her polished facade fractured. "She owns the island," she whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. Evelyn, her hat long lost to the sea, snapped, "Mother, you said she was nothing." Richard, nursing a coffee, groaned, "We're a laughingstock now." The articles detailed Catherine's rise, a Brooklyn girl who'd turned rejection into a real estate empire, buying Isla Sirenita with her fortune. Forbes had profiled her months ago, but the Newmans, blinded by prejudice, hadn't cared to look. The viral canoe video, shared by guests and amplified by bloggers, sealed their disgrace. Comments poured in. They insulted her and the island fought back, and Catherine's a queen, they're just fools. The Newman social circle, once a fortress of elite approval, turned on them. Texts flooded Victoria's phone. "You've embarrassed us all," one read. Another, from a society matron, was blunt. "Your behavior was deplorable." Back in Chicago, the Newmans, desperate to salvage their tattered reputation, convened in their opulent Lakeshore Drive mansion. Victoria, her usual icy elegance frayed, paced the marble foyer, her face pale without its usual veneer. Claire, Evelyn, and Richard sat stiffly in the drawing room, their eyes red-rimmed, their confidence drowned in the Caribbean. The weight of public scorn pressed like a storm cloud. Victoria, swallowing her pride, announced a plan, a lavish apology dinner to beg Catherine's forgiveness. "We have no choice," she said, her voice low, almost broken. "She's not who we thought, and we're ruined if we don't make amends." The dinner was set in a gilded ballroom, its chandeliers casting a warm glow over tables draped in ivory silk. Chicago's elite gathered, their curiosity piqued by the Newmans' fall. Catherine and Edward arrived, her tailored cobalt dress a statement of power, his hand a steady anchor. Catherine's presence commanded the room, her mahogany skin luminous, her eyes sharp with the knowledge of her victory. Guests murmured, their respect palpable, a stark contrast to the rehearsal dinner's venom. Victoria stood, her muted gray dress a far cry from her usual flair, her hands twisting nervously, a gesture Catherine had never seen. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria began, her voice faltering, "we're here to right a wrong." She turned to Catherine, her eyes glistening, a crack in her armor. "Catherine, I was wrong. I called you a gold digger, dismissed your worth, your strength, your empire. They shamed us. I'm sorry." Her words, raw and heavy, hung in the air. Claire, her voice barely above a whisper, spoke next. "I judged you, Catherine. I was jealous of your grace. I'm sorry." Evelyn, tears streaking her face, added, "We were cruel. You didn't deserve it." Richard, gruff but subdued, muttered, "My apologies, you're more than we ever saw." The apologies, though raw, carried the weight of necessity. The viral video, the scathing messages from their peers had forced their hand. Catherine stood, her posture regal, her gaze sweeping the room. Guests leaned forward, sensing a moment that would echo. Edward's hand brushed hers, his pride a quiet fire. The Newmans had thought they could diminish her, but Isla Sirenita had been her stage, and the world now knew her truth. The ballroom held its breath, waiting for her response as Catherine prepared to speak, her voice poised to reshape the narrative once more. The Chicago skyline glittered beyond the ballroom's towering windows, a constellation of steel and glass that mirrored the fire in Catherine Okoye's heart. The apology dinner, hosted by the humbled Newman family, pulsed with a tension as delicate as the crystal chandeliers overhead. Catherine stood at the center of the gilded room, her cobalt dress a bold stroke against the ivory silk tablecloths, her mahogany skin luminous under the soft light. Edward Newman, her husband, stood beside her, his hand a steady anchor, his hazel eyes blazing with pride. The air crackled with anticipation, Chicago's elite leaning forward in their seats. Their murmurs hushed. Victoria Newman, Claire Winston, Evelyn, and Richard had just laid bare their remorse, their voices trembling with the weight of public disgrace and personal reckoning. Now all eyes were on Catherine, the woman who'd turned their prejudice into her triumph. Victoria's apology still echoed, her usually icy demeanor cracked by vulnerability. "Catherine, your strength shamed us," she'd said, her eyes glistening. Claire's whispered admission of jealousy, Evelyn's tearful regret, and Richard's gruff contrition had followed, each word a stone lifted from the rubble of their arrogance. The viral video of their canoe debacle, the headlines revealing Catherine's ownership of Isla Serenita, and the scorn of their social circle had forced this moment. Yet Catherine saw the subtext. Their apologies, though raw, were born partly of necessity, a bid to salvage their standing. She felt the weight of the room's expectations, the staff's quiet pride from the shadows, and the memory of every slight she'd endured, from Brooklyn's streets to the Newman's venom. She stepped forward, her heels clicking on the marble floor, her voice clear and resonant, cutting through the silence like a blade. "Your words mean more than you know," she began, her gaze sweeping from Victoria to Claire, Evelyn, and Richard. "Not because they heal the past, but because they mark a choice to face your flaws. You saw me as less than, a gold digger, an outsider. You insulted my staff, people like Marcus Tate and Jamal, who make places like Isla Serenita shine. That wasn't a mistake. It was a choice rooted in prejudice." Her words landed with precision, and guests exchanged glances, some nodding, others gripping their napkins. Victoria's face flushed, her hands twisting, but she didn't look away. Catherine's eyes softened, but her voice held steel. "I forgive you," she said, pausing as gasps rippled through the room. "Not for your sake, but for mine. I won't carry your burden, and I forgive you for Marcus, Jamal, and every person you've diminished, because they deserve a world where apologies aren't needed. But hear this. Forgiveness isn't absolution. Live differently. Prove your words with actions, not just for me, but for everyone you've overlooked." The room erupted in soft claps, swelling into a wave of applause. A woman in pearls whispered, "She's extraordinary." A young couple nodded, their eyes wide with admiration. The staff, visible through the ballroom's glass doors, stood taller, their smiles a quiet victory. Victoria's head bowed, a gesture of respect she'd never offered before. Claire's shoulders slumped, her eyes red, the weight of her jealousy laid bare. Evelyn wiped tears, her usual sharpness dulled, while Richard rubbed his temple, his discomfort palpable. Edward's hand squeezed Catherine's, his voice a warm murmur. "You're unstoppable," he said, pulling her close. She leaned into him, her heart full, the city's skyline a canvas of possibility beyond the glass. She thought of Marcus's dignified nod, Jamal's sly grin after the canoe mishap, and the staff who'd rallied to save her wedding. They were her army, and this moment was theirs as much as hers. The dinner unfolded, plates of roasted quail and truffle risotto passing under the chandeliers, but the mood had shifted. Guests approached Catherine, their handshakes warm, their words weaving a tapestry of respect. "Your wedding was inspiring," a silver-haired banker said. "Isla Serenita is yours in every way." Another, a young journalist, added, "Your story's changing things." Catherine thanked them, her grace a quiet fire. The Newmans, seated at a corner table, ate in near silence, their isolation a stark contrast to the room's warmth. Victoria's usual command was gone, her glances at Catherine tinged with something new, not just shame, but a flicker of awe. Catherine's mind drifted to Brooklyn, to the girl who dreamed beyond her circumstances, to the mother whose necklace still hung at her throat, a talisman of resilience. She'd built an empire, turned an island into her stage, and reshaped the Newmans' world. The apologies, imperfect as they were, marked a crack in their armor, a victory she'd forced open. She glanced at Edward, his smile a vow, and felt the weight of her triumph settle like a crown. The ballroom glowed, its light wrapping her in a promise. No shadow could dim her spirit. As the night wound down, guests lingered, their chatter a soft hum. Catherine and Edward stepped onto a balcony, the Chicago skyline stretching before them like a sea of stars. The Newmans' words, their humbled faces, lingered in her mind, but they were no longer her burden. She was Catherine Okoye, architect of Isla Serenita, a woman who'd turned prejudice into power. With Edward's love, Marcus's pride, and her empire behind her, she stood ready to shape the future, her light unyielding, her victory complete. As Catherine Okoye's story fades under Chicago's glittering skyline, her triumph on Isla Serenita echoes, a testament to resilience and the power to rise above prejudice. We hope this tale of defiance and love has inspired you. What moved you most about Catherine's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know where you're listening from. Your support fuels our passion for storytelling, so please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to catch our next unforgettable tale. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We're grateful for every one of you. Until next time, keep shining, and we'll see you soon.